Boo, pot, ganja, El Momo, Cocoa Puffs, Mary Jane, Annie M, Papa's brand new bag. Yeah, it's all hip drug slang about a plant whose long history is really about a lot more than just drug use. Or anyway, a little bit more, I think. Tell you what, why don't we find out? The history of marijuana can get confusing because the plant it comes from really has two stories. There's cannabis and there's cannabis. So why don't we start by taking a look at cannabis. The cannabis plant comes from China. It's a tall plant and it produces a lot of fiber in its stalks. Not the kind we eat, but the kind we make textiles out of, like clothes, blankets, rope. Really. Back in China, people started figuring this out around 12,000 years ago. So when agriculture started developing there, the cannabis plant was cultivated, and by 1500 BC, it was an important crop. And it turns out not just for fiber. The seeds were edible, and you could make a decent milk out of them. Yum. Also, by 1500 BC, its use started to spread, first to the Scythians, and over the next 1,000 years, throughout the Mediterranean world and up into Northern Europe. In 1545, the Spanish brought it over to the New World, and by 1619, farmers in Virginia were required to grow it. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson grew it. Ben Franklin had a mill that made hemp paper, and in fact, Jefferson drafted the Declaration of Independence on that paper. Years later, Henry Ford made plastic car bodies out of hemp, and Rudolph Diesel built his engine to run on hemp oil. So what happened? Well, its fortunes went the way of its more notorious cousin, cannabis. The problem is that besides making hemp, these plants also produce THC. The levels in it are extremely low, and you'd need like 1,000 joints to get high. But it is an illegal substance today. The discovery of these varieties of cannabis also occurred in China around 12,000 years ago, maybe by the same guy. Back in those days, it was mainly known for its medicinal purposes, but as its use spread, so did the reasons for using it. For the Scythians, it may have played a religious role, while in India, recreation and religion were the main uses of this sacred grass. In Persia, their ancient religion of Zarathustra called it the good narcotic, and it was widely known throughout the Greek and Roman worlds. In the Muslim world, it became popular in the form of hashish, and it was here that the first prohibition of the drug occurred in 1378. 400 years later, Napoleon banned its use in Egypt, but his men brought it back to France anyway, and several popular hashish clubs became vogue. In fact, up through the 1800s, the plant was widely used for textile, medicinal, and recreational purposes. Abraham Lincoln once wrote that his two favorite pastimes were smoking hemp and playing his harmonica. And I thought Willie Nelson was the first person to smoke pot in the White House. But by the end of the 1800s, cannabis in all its varieties had begun to fall in disfavor by governments around the world. Here in the States, the push for criminalization roughly occurred between 1906 and 1937. And it's fair to say that it was mainly motivated by greed, racism, and fear.
Have you ever met that funny reefer man? Have you ever met that funny reefer man? If he says he swam to China, wants to sell you South Carolina, then you know you're talking to that reefer man. Have you ever met that funny reefer man? Oh, that funny, funny, funny reefer man. If he trades you dimes for nickels, he says watermelons are pickles, you know you're talking to that reefer man.
Today, It's the third most frequently used non-medical drug behind alcohol and tobacco. And that does bring up a good, although perhaps irrelevant, medical point. And that is that cannabis is at worst a lesser evil than tobacco and alcohol. I say irrelevant because in polls conducted as recently as today, most Americans still oppose legalizing marijuana. But a very interesting fact that no one seems to have noticed is that the under age 30 group approved it. And that's the same group that approved it in the late 60s. In my opinion, that means one of two things. Marijuana keeps you young, or marijuana kills. Either way, I think it could affect public opinion. I like that one too. Well, that's going to wrap things up for today. But before I forget, here in the States, it really isn't considered a cannabis documentary unless somewhere there's a mention of Woody Harrelson. So, we're cool. And remember, if you want to know more about this or any other topic, the information's out there. You just got to find it. See ya.